The high-stakes investment world has been experiencing a metamorphosis as it evolves to make way for new, more accessible ways of raising capital. This evolution has been spurred on by the introduction of equity crowdfunding.
Equity crowdfunding is like Kickstarter or Indiegogo in the sense that people are putting their ideas online and trying to raise capital from people that believe in them or want to be part of something greater than themselves. The only difference is Kickstarter and Indiegogo are donation or rewards-based crowdfunding, and equity or debt-based crowdfunding is literally securities-based crowdfunding, so it's investment-based crowdfunding. So same concept, but instead of you giving money and getting something in return, you're actually investing in a startup or small business, and you own a piece of equity in that business, or you have a debt instrument, and you will be paid back principal and interest.
It might not be the sexiest offerings being made. It's not necessarily going to be high-tech. It can be restaurants. It can be people making park benches out of recycled plastic. That sort of stuff doesn't get the attention of Silicon Valley, and yet it is a useful thing. The investors have good ideas. They might be profitable if it all goes well, and people should be allowed to help teams that they believe in.
Before equity crowdfunding, similar opportunities were typically limited to a smaller group of investors who already had access to large amounts of capital. Now, the doors have been opened up to a wider pool of investment-minded people, allowing for all manner of new opportunities in the crowdfunding world.
Crowdfunding has this incredible power to be a flywheel that will propel innovation, create jobs, and ultimately build wealth. I think that's an incredible kind of tri-pillar approach to what this thing can be.
It's not going to be a get-rich-quick scheme, but it does allow the average American to get in on an opportunity where they're like, you know what, I believe this can be the next unicorn out there, and actually own an early piece of that could benefit them that way. That doesn't exist elsewhere in the capital markets.
The reality is, so here's this opportunity. There's $36 trillion that's estimated to come over the next few years. There's no financial literacy, so retail investors are flocking to Google and finding financial influencers painting this incredibly rosy-colored picture. No education, no risk, no downside. So we're going to start seeing unaccredited risk capital jump in without being prepared. And I think inevitably that might be the downfall here, and that's the big problem, is if the SEC starts to realize that retail is in trouble, they will cancel this entire program altogether.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Please have a seat.
Earlier, President Obama signed the Jobs Act into law.
I'm just happy that we actually had bipartisan support for a jobs bill.
The controversy around the expanded ability to raise money.
Prior to 2012, the benefits of crowdfunding were limited to a donations or rewards base. Then, President Obama signed into law the Bipartisan Jobs Act, which paved the way for crowdfunding by easing the restrictions on who could invest. The SEC adopted final rules for Title III of the Jobs Act, permitting the use of equity crowdfunding. In late 2020, investors had to make over $200,000 a year or maintain a net worth of $1 million. Now, equity crowdfunding allows everyone to be a part of the investment capital world.
One of the fundamental changes that came out of this legislation is we now allow the average American to be a part of a startup or small business. What they didn't know is before, they were just precluded. Now, people weren't investing in this partially because they just didn't know about it. But now you can invest in it because we've created a pathway for the average American to be part of it.
The SEC has used how much money you make as measuring sticks as to what you're allowed to do. And I think that's where we kind of have this tension between investor and opportunity.
On the one hand, it's great because there are two really major ways that household wealth is built, right? It is through owning a house and paying off the mortgage, and it's through investing. And so that's one of the many reasons I'm in favor of crowdfunding. It is potentially, when used as part of a diversified investment strategy, it is a way of building wealth, potentially. But the problem is that it makes the SEC very worried that people are investing not understanding what the risks are, not understanding they can lose everything, and not understanding one of the most basic things, which is before you make an investment, read the disclosure. The SEC has spent a load of time working out what people need to know. And so the issuers owe it to the investors to make sure that the investors understand what is at risk. And of course, what is primarily at risk is you could lose everything. I mean, that's the whole point here. Most startups fail. Most restaurants fail. Early stage companies are incredibly risky.
Many investor protection advocates agree that the potential for crowdfunding is huge and exciting, but they worry about the dangers of rushing into this new landscape when the livelihoods of investors are on the line. That's why these advocates push for investor education, hoping that those who want to join in understand what they're getting into to the fullest extent.
One of the constant complaints we hear is that the regulations are too complicated, and they're not. They're really not. If you're paying attention and you have good advisors, you should be able to comply with the regulations. It's securities law. You kind of can't make it lawyer-free. You can make it lawyer-light, and you can make it lawyer-easy, and you can make it so lawyers don't have to charge too much. But this is complex stuff.
Equity crowdfunding takes place online in a very transparent fashion in a highly regulated way that costs capital to do. And so if you're afraid that people are going to pull the wool over people's eyes, yes, it will happen. But is it going to happen systematically? Is it going to cause some sort of credibility issue for the structure, the capital markets in general? Absolutely not. We built the way in which investors get that information in there so that you don't have to worry about the fraud, so that you don't have to worry about people taking advantage of, so that we had a regulated structure so that if someone did commit fraud, and by the way, there are anti-fraud provisions in this whole structure, that wasn't removed from it. So if you commit fraud in this, well, you go to jail. We have that in there.
Ultimately, the regulation of equity crowdfunding comes down to finding and maintaining the proper balance between access to capital for entrepreneurs and protection for investors.
5.5 years into it, we've got all the data now to prove that it's working. It's logical, capital flowing, there's minimal fraud, and if they look at the benefits of investment crowdfunding, equity crowdfunding, they far, far outweigh the risks. And if they look at the data that's coming out of it, they would see that there's much more benefit than there is risk for them or for investors in the process. I understand that investor protection is important. I understand that you don't want people to lose money. And so how do we teach people about, going into the capital markets? How do we teach people about investing properly?
There are different proposals and ideas for investor education, including regulations and government programs. But there are also companies hoping to offer solutions. Equifund is one of those companies.
On the Equifund side, the concern for us is the investor protection side, right? It's the ability for an investor to walk into this industry comfortable with the risks. We felt as though when we looked at the space, the incumbents had focused on raising capital, which is obviously an important part of the equation, but we didn't feel like anybody was out there supporting the investor. That's why we're focused on education-based marketing, is to help retail investors cross that knowledge chasm, be more confident, and feel better about the decisions they're making as they've unlocked this asset class. We feel as though educated investors will become more passionate investors and more active investors. I think there's that knowledge gap that we're trying to get people over, but once they get there, the sky's the limit.
The current regulation of equity crowdfunding is still a debated topic between entrepreneurs and investment protection advocates. But when it comes down to it, both sides agree that an educated investor is a better protected investor.
The way in which we regulate investment crowdfunding is so critically important because at the end of it, we're trying to figure out how do we spur entrepreneurship, innovation, and job creation at the most micro level in our communities.
I absolutely think that the current regulations are fair. I think they're balanced. I think that the problem is that they do need to be enforced, and there does need to be an educational outreach. People need to understand them. So enforcement and education, I think, on top of the existing regulations is what we need.
There's incredible ways for us to look at crowdfunding, and we're just scratching the surface on what could be a really interesting asset class. and a transfer of wealth that we haven't seen before.